Elizabeth at Literary Princess. If you are new here, welcome. I am a 6-year PhD candidate in English literature with a focus on Victorian women novelists, and as you might expect, I love to read. Today I have for you the wrap-up of the George Eliot project. So I'm going to start by telling you a bit about the project in case you have not been keeping up and why I started it. I will then be ranking all of Eliot's fiction, and then I will end with kind of my final thoughts and feelings about George Eliot. Let's jump in. So I started the George Eliot project in 2023, and the idea was to read all of George Eliot's fiction in publication order within a year. It ended up taking a year and a half, mostly because of the mill on the floss, but we'll talk about that. So I did this project because I've had a very complicated relationship with Eliot over the years. I read her for the first time when I was 14. It was The Mill on the Floss, and I loved it. But then, I read it at the beginning of my freshman year of high school, and then toward the end, we had to read Silas Marner as part of class. And I found it very boring. And then I did not pick up any Eliot again until I was in my master's program when we had to read Adam Bede, and I was so bored that I could not finish it. I would then go on to read Romola during my PhD program and love it. And then I picked up Middlemarch and it became my nemesis. So as you can see, it's really this back and forth of love-hate with Eliot's works. And she is one of the biggest names in Victorian fiction, especially within the women writers. So I really felt that I should read all of her fiction, and I really felt like I should like her more than I did. Because even though I did like a few of them, I felt very guilty about not liking Middlemarch. Is that dumb? Probably. But I felt bad. I felt like everybody else loves this book. I should too. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this project, and I'm gonna read through everything, and I'm gonna finally make up my mind on how do I feel about George Eliot. So, let's go into the rankings first. I am going to go from my least favorite to my most favorite. And I think the order of at least two of these will surprise some people because the rating of one book has actually gone up since I made my video on it, which caused it to bump up ahead of another book. So, let's do the rating. I'd say there are 11 pieces of fiction that I will be talking about here. 2 are individual short stories. 1 is a short story collection. 1 is, I don't know what it is, a collection of fictional essays. And then the rest are novels. So, starting with my least favorite, which is not going to come as a surprise to anybody who has been watching. The Impressions of Theophrastus Such. This is Eliot's last piece of published fiction, and I was so utterly disappointed with this, especially because I had really been getting along well with her later fiction. And then she came out with this. I was, no. So this is 1.5 stars, sitting at rank 11 as the worst George Eliot work I have read. Hated it. Sitting at number 10 is one of her short stories. This is Brother Jacob. I really hated this one too. The only thing that made this slightly better than Theophrastus Such was that this had a plot. That's the only thing. It portrays a mentally handicapped person in a way that was just really not it. I didn't like the plot. I didn't think it was particularly well written or interesting. There was none of the character depth that I am used to with George Eliot. This is actually a short story that she wrote earlier in her career and then published a few years later. So I understand why it's not as good as some of her works that were published around the same time. But like, honestly, girl, you just shouldn't have published it. I gave this 2 stars. Sitting at number 9 is her other short story, The Lifted Veil. This is like her kind of gothic, supernatural story. It's like the only one of its kind. I just wasn't that interested in it, to be honest. Again, it's too short to really get the full depth of the characters the way I'm used to with Eliot, so I gave this 3 stars. I didn't hate it like I did Brother Jacob or Theophrastus Such, but I don't think I would read it again. Coming in at number 8, I feel like I might get yelled at for this. This is Adam Bede. This is George Eliot's first novel. It is the one that I couldn't finish in my master's degree. I liked it more this time. I just find the pacing very off. Like, it is very slow for most of the book, and then all of a sudden this big thing happens and we like rush through it to get to an ending that I didn't find satisfying. So while I can see where Eliot is starting with her great character depth with this book, it wasn't quite there for me. I gave it 3.5 stars. I didn't dislike it. I'm glad that I've read it. I might revisit it, but I think you can tell it's a debut novel because the pacing is just bad. Sorry, I know a lot of people really like this one, but she wrote better novels. Coming in at number 7 is her short story collection, Scenes of Clerical Life. So this is kind of weird because it's 3 short stories, and it's like, I was like, do I rate them separately? Do I write them together? I decided to just rate them together. This is actually her first published fiction, which is interesting that like I see a lot of issues with Adam Bede with it being a debut novel, but this ranks higher even though it was written before. So this contains 3 short stories that names I'm not gonna remember off the top of my head, so let's look at the table of contents. The Sad Fortunes of the Reverend Amos Barton, Mr. Gilfil's Love Story, and Janet's Repentance. I liked some of these more than others. My favorite was Mr. Gilfil's Love Story. Second was probably Janet's Repentance, and then the third was Amos Barton. Again, I think you're starting to see what Eliot will become with this. It doesn't quite make it all the way there, but I overall found this very enjoyable and gave it 4 stars. Coming in at number 6 is one that I used to not like. This is Silas Marner. So, like I said, I read this my first year of high school, and I was so bored. So bored. I don't know why you would make a high schooler read this. This is not a book to give high schoolers. Again, we have evidence of Eliot's pacing problem. This was, I guess, her 3rd novel. Like, it doesn't get started until chapter 12, which starts here. However, this time around, I really appreciated Eliot's character work and her depiction of Silas and how having this orphan child changes him. Also found one of my least favorite characters in Victorian fiction. I have a whole video on that if you want to hear me rant about that. But yes, I really appreciated this as an adult. I thought it was great. Again, this just, why would you give a 14-year-old this? Why? I thought I hated this for so long. It's actually a really great book. It is one of the places that I would suggest starting with Eliot, just not when you're 14. Maybe like when you're 18. Coming in at number 5 is one that is truly dropped down for me. This is The Mill on the Floss. So this used to be my favorite Eliot novel. Again, I also read this at 14. This is a much better read to give a 14-year-old if you're really like, this 14-year-old needs to read George Eliot. Give them this, because Maggie, the main character, is a child for a solid half of the book, and it'll just be much more engaging. So this book has gone from being my favorite to being fifth, and every time I've reread it, it has dropped down. I've read it 3 times now. The first when I was in high school, the second in 2022 for my qualifying exams, and then the third in 2023 for this project, at which point it took me months to finish this. Because I just like didn't want to read it. And I don't know if that's because I had reread it so recently and was just like, I don't want to read this again. Or if the problems were really just sticking out to me. And the problems did stick out to me more and more each time I reread it. The pacing, again, bad. This is Eliot's second novel. Her pacing's a problem. I'll talk about that more at length. I still love the character of Maggie. I mean, it's fifth. Like, it's not like I hated it. I still liked it. But it has gone from being a 5-star when I was in high school to being a 4.5-star on my first reread. And then this time it dropped down to a 4-star. So even though I do like it, and I really appreciate Maggie as a character, but I also really appreciate like what it did for me in high school when I first read it. Like that memory of 14-year-old me being in love with it, like that is something special to me. But it is not my favorite, and I don't think it's Eliot's best, though I would suggest this also as a good place to start with her, because it is not as complicated as some of her later books, even though those are technically better novels. Also, 2 more of my least favorite characters in Victorian fiction. Eliot really writes men that suck. Coming in at number 4, and here, this one and the third one I think are where people might be surprised at the shift. So coming in at number 4 is Felix Holt. I thought I was gonna hate this book. First of all, it's the Eliot novel you never hear about. Oxford World's Classics doesn't even have it in their current catalog. I just did a whole project on that. Anyway, it's her political novel, and I was like, oh God, spare me. I was surprisingly pleased with this book. Her pacing is really good here. And I really liked the character of Esther Leon. Like, I was not, like, the politics part, I'm like, like, I'm just not interested in politics in general. And of course, they come up a lot in Victorian literature, but yeah, I really liked the plot with Esther Leon, and I was just amazed at how well paced this was. So I gave it 4 stars. It's really more of like a 4.25, but I don't do quarter-star ratings. So I did really like it, and I thought this was going to be in 3rd place. However, in 3rd is Middlemarch, my nemesis. So when I made my video, I gave this 4 stars. It has since bumped up to 4.5 for me. Why, you say? So even though I think the pacing in this is bad, these characters keep coming back into my head in a way that the characters of Felix Holt do not. Like, I can just be like hanging out and then suddenly thinking about Dr. Lydgate or Dorothea or my love Mary Garth. They just keep coming back to me, and I think that that is obviously shows how good of a writer Eliot is and how good she is at characters. But also, like, it just, it means it needs to be a higher rating for me. Is it a perfect novel? No, and I would disagree with those who say it is a perfect novel, or that it's even Eliot's best novel. I don't agree, but it is my third favorite. It has gone from nemesis to favorite. Amazing. Sitting in number 2 is Romola with 4.5 stars. This is another one where her pacing is just marvelous. Like George Eliot, you've pulled it off twice and only twice in your whole career. This is historical fiction taking place in Renaissance Florence, following a woman named Romola. This has another of my least favorite characters in Victorian literature, although I love to hate him. Tito he's a great character. Great character, but he sucks. I feel like it's so odd for me to like this because I don't know anything about the time period, and like even reading it, this was my second time reading it. I was still like, I know nothing about this time period. I'm like looking at the notes constantly because I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. But this story just truly struck something in me. I don't know if it's because Tito's such a great villain. Like, Romola herself is not super interesting, in my opinion. Although what she does in reaction to Tito being Tito is interesting to me. The ending is very interesting to me as well. But yeah, I just really love this book. I think it's so well done. I think she brings Renaissance Florence to life. Not that I would know because I have not even been to modern day Florence, much less Renaissance Florence, but hey. Yeah, so number 2. So that must mean that, of course, in the number 1 spot is Daniel Deronda, which I don't think is a surprise to anybody because it's the only one I gave 5 stars to. Eliot still has a pacing problem. She's just got pacing problems. However, I think her finest character work is done in this book. I think the pacing problem is not as bad as I felt it was on my original read. Definitely not as bad as the pacing problems of some of the other books. I just love this. I love the character of Gwendolyn Harleth. She is one of my favorite characters in literature. And I just think this is a masterpiece and is George Eliot's best book. So, my absolute favorite, my number 1, Daniel Deronda. All right, so how has my perception of George Eliot changed? So I used to say I have a very complicated relationship with her. I don't think my relationship with her is as complicated now. I think I, generally speaking, like her. There are a few outliers. Yo, phrased as such. Like, maybe I should just pretend it didn't happen. Like, when I finished that, I kind of felt like I'd gone back to square one with Eliot. Like, I had really started falling in love with her, and then she wrote that, and I was like, girl, no. But I think if I just ignore its existence, maybe I'll be fine. As I've been saying repeatedly, I do think that Eliot has a major pacing problem. Everyone's always saying that Middlemarch is like the greatest work of Victorian literature. I don't agree. There are better plotted books, there are better paced books. She does have amazing character work, I will give her that. But girl didn't know how to plot and like do pacing on a novel. She managed it with Felix Holt and Romola. She did not manage it at any other time, truly. She got better, I'll give her that. Middlemarch and Daniel Deronda are not as badly paced as The Mill on the Floss or Adam Bede. But it is not something she excels at. So I think, and like, I even feel that way about Daniel Deronda, which I still gave 5 stars because I'm like, nothing matters, I still love this book. No matter what. But I do think Eliot's pacing will always be an issue for me. However, her character work is truly amazing. Her writing is beautiful. It's slow. It's wordy. She is sometimes very pretentious. She's a very intelligent woman. And I read a biography of her by Rosemary Ashton as well for this project. And learning about her made me like her more as well, even though, yes, she's pretentious. She was so smart. She read multiple languages. She just was truly an intelligent person in a time when women generally were not able to express that. What I really related to her is how she had anxiety about publishing. She was always worried that her books weren't good enough. Like, to the point where her romantic partner, George Henry Lewis, who she was not married to because he was married to somebody else, this whole thing, he like had to kind of control which criticisms got to her and which didn't. Like, he filtered stuff because it would send her into like a depressive episode. So that kind of made her more human for me than what she presents in her novels. The narrator of her novels is always very high. I don't know how to describe it other than that. Just very high up there and kind of pretentious. And you're like, you're kind of insufferable. But learning about her as a person made me like her more. And again, I really did like the majority of her works. I mean, even Adam Bede, which is number whatever it was, 8, I think. 8? I don't know. I don't remember. I just said it like 10 minutes ago and I don't remember it. Oh well. Even that, which is lower on the list, I don't think is a bad book. And I enjoyed parts of it. I just had some issues. So I think I can truly say that I like George Eliot now. She is not one of my favorite authors, although Daniel Deronda might be a favorite book, which it's interesting how that works. I don't consider an author a favorite unless I've truly loved 3 or more of their books. And I do not think Eliot makes it there for me. But she is an author that I like. I enjoy reading her. I will reread her. I will maybe even teach her. Actually, I have taught her. I taught a chapter from Adam Bede in my Victorian unit for my British literature class about realism. But I might teach one of her full novels at some point. Who knows? So yeah, I feel like me and George Eliot have made our peace, as long as we can ignore impressions of Theophrastus such, because it ain't it. So, that is my final thoughts on the George Eliot project. It feels so weird to say that, because I've been doing this for a year and a half. I'm like, now what am I gonna do? No, I know what I'm gonna do. I am starting a new project in 2024. I'll give you a little teaser, I guess. It's going to be called the 18th Century Novel Project. So obviously I will be reading novels from the 18th century. And you'll have to wait to hear more about that until my reading goals and plans for 2025 comes out. That sounds like a fake year. So, if you have been with me on this journey the whole time, thank you so much. If you have found it at some point in the middle of the project, thank you so much for watching. If this is your first time watching one of my George Eliot project videos, hi, I have a whole playlist if you want to look back. Yeah, just thank you for coming along on this journey with me, no matter where you started with me from. It's been a pleasure reading the comments and seeing how people feel about the different books and how my opinions vary. So, let me know down in the comments below What is your ranking for George Eliot's fiction? Do you agree with me? Disagree with me? Which is your favorite? Which is your least favorite? If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to see more of my bookish content. It has been great chatting with you. I will see you soon. Bye.